I am Justin Braun, and this is my This Is Me final project. For this class, each week we are required to submit personal assessments, in which I learned a lot about myself and was fortunate to ask myself a lot of questions I wouldn't have. One of these assessments quite early on, in fact in week one, enlightened me to a lot of things that I hadn't realized and forced me to look a little bit deeper about what this class was going to have in store for me. This assessment was called Assessing Your Communication. How interpersonal are your relationships? Typically, as a male from the state of Ohio, my relationships weren't as interpersonal as I quite thought. But through some of these questions, I was able to realize that they do mean a lot more to me and do have a lot more leaning on my own personal behavior than I realized before. The last question really stood out to me being, to what extent does the relationship create its own intrinsic rewards? How much do you like being together just for the sake of sharing each other's company? Which is simply the essence of my friendships. I don't really create friends for other aspects, for rewards or anything, outside of just me liking their person and me wanting to be around them. The next assessment I'd like to take some time to focus on is the Assessing Your Communication. What is your intercultural communication competence? This is a multi-part assessment, so there's a lot of ways we can dissect this and really break it down. One thing that I learned about myself after these series of assessments is that while my intellect is generally kind of low, well, culturally, universally, I am pretty accepting and open to a lot of different cultures. It doesn't really affect me. I think that this has to do a lot of my upbringing coming from a diverse city. Most importantly, through part one of this assessment, I learned that there's a lot of separate pieces that I can include in my day-to-day life to help me increase my cultural competence. Some of these questions asked, I am conscious of my cultural knowledge when interacting with people with different backgrounds. For me, this is something I don't really have to think about, and I just kind of do it. But the next question, I adjust my cultural knowledge as I interact with people from a culture that is unfamiliar to me. That is something I don't do, but I can see how that would be very important in creating a comfortable and social environment. In this next section, this current assessment I'm looking at, Assessing Your Communication, Your Empathy Quotient, made me question and realize a lot of things about myself in my own life and things that I can be doing better to make everyone feel very comfortable with me. I learned that I'm doing some things right, but I'm also doing some things wrong, that I can increase my empathy in my day-to-day interactions. Certain questions like, it upsets me to see someone being treated disrespectfully, kind of reinforced me that I did have a great amount of empathy for others. However, other questions like, I become irritated when someone cries, I would have to understand more of the scenario and the environment and the things leading up to it. I think in my own life, one important thing will be to broaden my empathy for those who aren't necessarily in my in-group or my social group immediately. One assessment that I didn't necessarily learn about myself much, but kind of reinforced what I already knew, was the Assessing Your Communication, Online and Offline Self-Disclosure, Part 1. I think that in this day and age, it has become increasingly hard to be open yourself online. It's a platform where anyone can see, anyone can comment, and anyone can share whatever they want about you, or can kind of misconstrue things for what they want to say. I have always been very aware of this, and because of this, I don't necessarily make frequent posts about myself. If I do, it's about some type of award, achievement, or something I just deem that I want to deem respectable enough to show to everybody. So when I'm asked questions in this assessment, like posts I make myself are often long and detailed, and posts about myself, I let others know openly about who I truly am. While I like to say yes, and I am authentic in that sense, we all don't. We all have a mask we kind of hold over this, and I guess something I can do better because I have somewhat of a platform is to be open with myself, be open with others, to kind of show people the ups and the downs of my own life. Lastly, the final assessment I like to focus on is the Assessing Your Communication, Nonverbal Immediacy Behaviors. I think that this showed me, like some of the other tests did, that I do a lot of things great, but there's also some blaring things that I can really fix in my own communication skills. Some of these nonverbal communication skills are really important, and oftentimes, in everyday life and everyday conversations, they can tell more than our words even do. And oftentimes, if one of these modes of communication is so blaring that the words you're saying won't affect it at all. Something I learned about myself from these questions, such as I am animated when I talk to people, I have a bland expression when I talk to people, I avoid eye contact while talking to people, I do all these things, but I found when I think a little bit more at it, in certain situations, during certain conversations, I don't do these things. And I need to fix that to show people that I care, even though I may be uncomfortable with the topic or may not want to have the conversation, because sometimes it is needed to have regardless. There are some blaring and immediate concepts that I've learned from this class that are going to be very effective for me in my day-to-day life. One of the most relevant things to me was cultural competence, the ability to communicate and understand with cultures that you're familiar and unfamiliar of. I believe that this is becoming more important day by day, as America is only diversifying more day by day. How well you're able to interact and socialize with other cultures is going to be more important, even in the social setting as well as the business setting. Another concept that really stood out to me was emotional variations. We all experience emotion, but how we perceive and express them can vary intensely. One of the most blaring ideas about this is that emotional variations can vary by culture. Some cultures just express emotions very differently than others. Some cultures don't like to express certain emotions. While that doesn't necessarily express how they feel all the time, it's important to know this and understand this to communicate effectively in life. An idea from this class that really stuck with me overall was that the idea that emotion or relationships are not static. This is something we don't really think about, but is very prevalent to us as we go through life. One more idea from this subject is that there are distinct phases in a relationship. I didn't really think of that, but it kind of makes sense if you think about how long it takes to trust somebody. Trust is not something you can just have immediately, and something that can kind of vary as a requirement from person to person. But these phases become distinct over time as your willingness to do stuff for others, your willingness to hang out, and it just becomes very prevalent. Something else that I really learned about in this class was that the different types of communications. There are vast types of communications and can vary extremely depending on who you're speaking to. This falls back into that variable that culture can really dictate on how someone communicates. One blaring example of this is different lingo or different slang that can vary state by state, accents. People all speak very differently. The last idea or umbrella term that I like to talk about is the idea of cultural effects, and that culture can affect us in ways we don't even fully understand. Some ways are obvious, some ways are not. One thing that stuck out to me was cultural language and how it can influence something as specific as the classroom setting. In conclusion, there's a plethora of ways that I can apply this information to my life as a whole. One way is that I can apply this to my life is to not remain content with communication. There are always better ways and more efficient ways that I can communicate with somebody. There is not one right way, and there's not a cookie cutter type of interaction. Being an ineffective communicator can lead to miscommunications in the workplace as well as socially, making everybody's life harder as it is. Another way I can apply these concepts into my life is to learn more about the struggles of others. Because of some of the tests that we took over this course, I understand that my empathy for those outside of my in-group could definitely grow. So I think that educating myself and learning about the different issues and battles people face on a day-to-day basis will make me a better communicator as a whole. Another way I can apply these skills and tools into my own life is by respecting the variables that contribute to being a better communicator. This could be such things as like my overall cultural competence, my nonverbal communication skills, or even just understanding the environment that I'm communicating in. All these variables play into how, who, and what I'm trying to say. So in order to communicate effectively, I need to master these skills and go about it very comfortably in conversation. Another concept that I picked up over the course of this class is to understand and respect the power of emotions. Emotions can affect us in ways we don't even understand at the moment. I'm sure there's something that happened to you maybe 5 years ago that you still might think about in some type of way. If you came across that person that maybe caused that emotion, you will have feelings. That's a part of the conversation, and maybe if it's in the workplace or even socially, you may not have to like everybody, but to understand your own emotions and understand how that affects how you communicate is very important in being successful. Something else I can do to utilize these concepts in my own life is to respect relationships for what they are. Maybe I want a relationship to be something else, but the other person just isn't looking for that. For instance, I may want to be friends with somebody in the office, and they just might not be looking for that type of relationship in the office. I can't make them do that. I need to respect them and respect that level of communication that we're going to share. Lastly, the most important thing I learned from this class is that culture is a very powerful thing. Cultures have a big impact on how everybody feels and operates with each other. Things like word choices, forms of intimacy, preferences, and respecting these differences will make life easier for everybody in my life.